Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to a look at the 2022 governor's races. Yes, you heard that correctly. We've actually finally got the maps up. The guy who owns this website, YakMS, he's finally updated it for 2022, minus the House. He just copy-pasted the current House map, which, to be fair, I mean, we aren't going to have redistricting data until until September for what's actually going to happen. So, I mean, it's what we got, okay? I marked off New Jersey and Virginia because guess what? Those elections are happening this year, and both of them are expected to be Democrat retentions. They're both expected to remain with the Democrats. Anyway, so we're going to basically cover off all the safe states: Idaho, Wyoming. I'm going to leave South Dakota. Nebraska, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, Alabama. I'm going to put South Carolina in that. Both Phil Scott and Charlie Baker are expected to run again, and I expect them to hold their seats. Safe Democratic seats: it's California, Oregon, Hawaii. Illinois is going to be interesting. I'll leave that one up, but it's probably going to be safe. New York, well, I'll put that one up, given Cuomo being a disgusting person. Okay. There's actually a lot of battleground here, if we're being honest. But let's go with the likely states, starting with Democrats, I guess. New Mexico should be a hold for them, though it may be a little bit more competitive. Colorado should also be a hold. I'm going to put that likely. Illinois I'm going to put there simply because I think I think the rural areas are catching up to the rest of the Rust Belt rural areas, like in Iowa, like in Ohio, as well as some of the Midwestern rural areas, such as Missouri, though Missouri has some southern parts as well, but Missouri, Iowa, the Dakotas as well. New York, it's all going to depend on whether Cuomo wins the primary or if he runs again. If he runs again and wins the primary, that could be a very competitive race. It really could be, and I'd probably put it as leans Democrat, but at the same time, it is New York, and I don't think a lot of New Yorkers would vote for a Republican, even a moderate or a liberal one, over a Democrat, no matter how terrible of a person that Democrat is. But it could give us a picture of the future of New York. Because I do think New York's rural areas and manufacturing towns are lagging behind both Illinois as well as the rest of the Rust Belt. Because New York actually does have parts that are Rust Belty, especially along Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, as well as upstate and a lot of western New York. Basically, once you get past Yonkers, New York starts looking a lot more like Pennsylvania and Ohio than the Northeast, which New York City does. That's based off my limited experience in New York, which was a flight into NYC and driving through it. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the state. But if he loses a primary or declines to run, it's safe Democratic. I'm going to err on the side that he either loses a primary or declines to run again. So we're going to put that in safe. I just felt like I wanted to actually discuss it. By the way, Illinois is probably going to be... It's almost certain to be a Democratic hold. It's just there may be some interest in that race. Moving on to states that should be likely for the Republicans. In South Dakota, Kristi Noem is not as popular as I think some Republicans would like to make her out to be. South Dakota was the only state not to go on a lockdown or have a mask mandate, but that isn't necessarily as popular as people would think, given the way she promotes it. But same time, it is a heavily Republican state in a Republican wave year, in a state that I don't really think is going to flip. She should be safe there. Alaska, I'm also putting that in the likely column just because Alaska's elections are pretty idiosyncratic. And with the ranked choice voting, I'm not sure how to really categorize it. It's going to be one of the more interesting states to watch. I'm also putting both Iowa and Ohio in this category, and I'm almost tempted to put Ohio as safe, just because I think both Iowa and Ohio, but Ohio specifically, have moved so far towards the Republicans. It's going to be very difficult for a Democrat to beat DeWine in that race, especially when they're going to be trying to put up a decent candidate for the Senate elections. And Ohio Democrats are starting to run out of candidates. Their bench is thinning. And Iowa is also another state with fairly idiosyncratic elections. Sure, it has 2 Republican senators and a Republican governor who is going to run for re-election and almost certainly win, I would say, based off of the recent history of the state. The thing is, though, Iowa can flip at a dime just because it's got a very swingy population and a population very prone to swinging. I'm also going to give Greg Abbott the benefit of the doubt. Now, this is based off of my confidence, not my expected margins. I think that Texas is definitely becoming an interesting state, but we're going to see how the Republican turnout machine, or more accurately, the Republican Party in Texas, has responded to both 2020 and 2018. We'll see whether or not that holds, and generally curious as to what goes on there. Maryland, I'm also putting in the likely category, even though it's probably going to be a fairly safe margin. And that's because if Larry Hogan can endorse the right candidate and find the right candidate, that race could actually be reasonably competitive. But Hogan is not eligible to run for re-election, and it's going to be very difficult for any Republican to win that race. So, let's be honest here. It's probably going to be a safe state. It's just, hey, it may be interesting if the right candidate can go in. Another likely state for the Republicans is going to be Florida. I really don't see DeSantis being threatened. He's got the Florida man vote on lockdown, and I talked about this on Wednesday, but the less national a race, the less nationally focused a race, the more Republican Miami-Dade tends to vote, and this is partially because of the Cuban vote. At the national level, they seem to be more open to voting for Democrats, but not as much as other Hispanic groups or Latino groups. And the more local you get, you notice that they vote more and more for Republicans, to the point where Miami typically elects Republican governors. I think their current... Did I say governors? I mean, Miami typically elects Republican mayors. The current mayor of Miami, I think, is a Republican, but I may be wrong on that. It's been a bit since I've actually looked at that. So I definitely think Florida is... I'm pretty confident about that one. Minnesota, I'm going to put that as likely for the Democrats, and I'm also going... Pennsylvania could be interesting. I'll leave that one up there. In the lean margin states, I'm going to put Nevada, or not even margin, but in the states I'm going to lean towards the Democrats. I'm going to put Nevada there. And that's just because it's a very inelastic state. And when I say inelastic, it basically just stays at about D+2 no matter what the election, no matter what the turnout. It's a really weird state. I'm going to put Maine up there, and I could probably put it in likely just because I don't really know what the bench in Maine is for the Republican Party. It's kind of a weak bench, if we're honest. And I'm going to put... not yet. I'll put Pennsylvania in the lean category, but that's kind of it. Moving towards some other states, I'm going to put both Connecticut and Rhode Island in that category as well. New England does like electing liberal Republican governors, so we could see the Republicans being very competitive in both of those races, though I'd err more on Rhode Island going Dem than Connecticut, but also remember I tend to err on the side of the incumbent. And that brings us to probably the six most competitive governor's races. Laura Kelly is going to be really in a tough position in Kansas. It's going to be a Republican favorable year. She's an incumbent who hasn't been able to do very much because she has to deal with supermajorities in both houses of Kansas' state legislature. Yeah, it's going to be a really rough go, but she's the incumbent, and it's generally a good idea to err on the side of the incumbent, but I think Kansas is just... it's going to be a very narrow win for the Republican, I would say. It's going to be very competitive for sure. I think this is a state that's probably going to flip. Georgia is another state I'm going to tilt towards the Republican. Kemp isn't the most popular figure in Georgia politics, certainly not the most popular Republican in Georgia politics. But he is the incumbent, and I think... I think he'll just hold on unless he runs up against a very strong Democratic candidate. Because, as we've seen, Democrats can't win in Georgia. But Georgia Republicans, they just passed in the House and the Senate, and Kemp signed it into law, some election rules overhauls. A lot of Democrats are calling it voter suppression. No, and I'm going to say this again, no, Patrick, ending no excuse absentee voting is not voter suppression. No, Patrick, requiring voter ID or a photo ID to vote is not voter suppression. Voter suppression is keeping people from voting. There are other ways to vote, you know. When requiring a photo ID to vote becomes voter suppression is when you actively shut down the locations needed to get a photo ID in areas of politically opposing demographics. That would be voter suppression. The law is written, from what I can tell, doesn't fit that bill. That said, I will agree in the South there has been a history of abusing that. I'm not going to argue that. But requiring an ID to vote is not suppression. It's just a confirmation that you are who you say you are. And no, ending no excuse absentee voting is not voter suppression. Especially, and that's especially true with very expansive early voting and all the rules that if you do vote on election day or even during early voting, if you're in line, they have to let you vote. Even if the polls are officially closed, if you're in line to vote, they can't just say, "Oh, polls are closed, get out of here." No, your vote will still count. And people are talking about H.R. 1. That's not going to pass. Joe Manchin has said he's not going to vote in favor of that. I think one or two other Democrats have said they're not going to vote in favor of that. And in addition, there is a constitutional issue. Yeah, the U.S. Congress can make alterations to the choosing of senators. That is actually within the power. I actually looked it up. But they don't have power to determine elections for anything other than senators. Yeah, I'm actually going to read the clause of the Constitution because I do think it's necessary to fully understand the debate. Oh, shut up. Shut up, phone. Alright, Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. But the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations except as to the places of choosing senators. Basically, states get exclusive right over Senate elections. But the issue is, if you change the rules for everything but Senate elections, you run into some due process and equal protection clause issues. That being that you can't, because of the way modern balloting works, you can't, are you really going to separate and have two ballots, making it even harder to vote? I don't think that would stand up to scrutiny, both from a legal perspective, but as well as from a principles perspective. If the Democrats are trying to make it easier to vote, because of the constitutional requirement that only each individual state gets to make that decision on Senate elections, you're requiring two different elections held on the exact same day and time and to be held under different rules. Are we not all supposed to be treated equally under the law? And not only that, but you're making it so difficult to vote at that point that that's even worse. So I don't think it stands to scrutiny, and I don't think H.R. 1 would be constitutional in the slightest. Arizona is very interesting because Doug Ducey is term limited and cannot run again. I think Arizona's Republican Party has a decent bench, but the Arizona Republican Party is also self-immolating. They are kind of having a feud between the more traditional Arizona GOP and the Trump wing of the party. And I don't think it's going to be very good for them. And I could actually see the Democrats picking this one up. I really could. So I'm going to tilt that towards the Democrats until I see polling and, more analysis on that race. New Hampshire, that one depends entirely on whether Chris Sununu decides to run for Senate or run for re-election as governor. If he runs for re-election as governor, that's a safe seat. It just is purely a safe seat. If he runs for Senate, though, the Republican bench is kind of not fantastic in New Hampshire. It's a very small state. Both New Hampshire representatives are Democrats, and their state house, as well as their state senator, are both very swingy. And I'm not entirely positive as to their overall composition. That said, Sununu would still weigh in heavily even if he did run for Senate. He would campaign with the Republican nominee, so I could honestly see Sununu dragging that over the edge for the GOP, even if he's not running it. So I would tilt it because I am assuming that Sununu runs for the Senate, because I think he's trying to get more national attention. I think Sununu is eyeing a presidential bid at some point in the future. Now we move on to Wisconsin and Michigan. Michigan, Governor Whitmer she's not doing so great. I think her approval is just above water, but I may be wrong. I don't believe for a second that she is a very safe incumbent. And I think that a decent enough challenge, maybe from John James, who, as we've seen, is a fairly strong candidate. He overperformed expectations and kept Michigan within 7 points in 2018 in the Senate race against Debbie Stabenow, who is relatively popular in Michigan, is very well known when John James was just coming to, recognition statewide, and is capable of, and of course that was a very Democratic favorable year, and a year when I would have expected, I think a lot of people were expecting Stabenow to win by 10-ish%. She only won by about 6.5%, which is still a comfortable win. I'm not arguing that. But John James vastly outperformed expectations. He significantly outperformed Donald Trump in the general election. And there was a decent chance that he would have actually carried Michigan. And that was against Gary Peters. I think John James has set himself up very well to run for governor in 2022. And he could maybe flip that seat. Then again, Whitmer is an incumbent, and I tend to err on the side of the incumbent, unless I have a good reason to believe otherwise, and I'm still going to err on the side of the incumbent in this case. I think John James is definitely the potential. He has the potential, but we'll see if he decides to run or if he has national ambitions. We'll see. Wisconsin. This is a place where I'm going to potentially also break my rule of erring on the side of the incumbent. And that's because Evers only just beat Scott Walker in a Democratic wave year. He underperformed significantly Tammy Baldwin, the senior senator from Wisconsin. Now, of course, Baldwin was facing a relatively unknown opponent, as well as is generally well regarded in Wisconsin. Whereas Evers was facing off against Scott Walker, who, while not the most popular elected official, still had a ton of clout and recognition. And he had proven very resilient in elections. He won a very narrow election in 2010, if I remember correctly, and then won a very narrow recall election. So Walker was a very tough opponent, so maybe Evers didn't realize his full potential in terms of electoral success. At the same time, I'm not sure he's the most popular figure. Kind of in a position of Scott Walker right now, except he didn't have a recall effort. We'll see who the Wisconsin Republicans put up against him, but their bench is pretty limited too. And Ron Johnson may be a small liability for all Republicans statewide in Wisconsin. So, yeah, I'm going to still err on the side of the incumbent here and tilt it towards Evers. But, yeah, that's going to be a very competitive race, and it's going to be very closely watched. But if there are two governors I think the Republicans may take out, it's Laura Kelly in Kansas and Evers in Wisconsin. But anyway, that's going to be it for today. I want to thank everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed. A like, a comment, and subscription is greatly appreciated. As well as if you know anybody who might like the content on this channel, go ahead and share it. Why not? Important links are down in the description. And have a very, very lovely evening. I may be live streaming tomorrow. I may not. We'll see. I'm going to make an attempt. Have a good day.